So I can see your screen now.
You can?
Actually, no, this is the webinar screen. Let me just. Yeah, is it the SIR Fellow in Residence Talk 2017?
Funny enough, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I do see your screen. And
Okay.
I think, can everyone else see?
Yes. Hi, Dr. Murphy. It's Ethan here.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yes, I can see your screen here.
Good.
And it looks like it's going up. Okay. All right.
So let me know when everyone's ready, and then I'll go ahead and introduce everyone here.
Okay, are you guys okay?
Yep. You guys ready?
I was thinking of going away and taking a walk with the dog, but that might be inconvenient.
Well, we can get started soon then. If we can do that. So, all right. Hi, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. My name is Justin. I'm a resident from the University of Iowa and a member of the Communications Committee and the Vascular Disease Service Line under the RFS. On behalf of the SIR Residence Fellows and Student Sections Communication Committee, thank you for taking the time out of your night to be here for this informative webinar on bioinnovations, where ideas come from. Before we hand it to our presenter for tonight, I want to remind everyone that this webinar will be recorded and will be available on YouTube in the coming days by searching IR Education. Anyone is free to ask questions at any time throughout the webinar. Simply enter them into the question box and under your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will keep track of them and answer them at the end. Also, please check the RFS website regularly for upcoming events and follow us on Twitter and Facebook for other updates and posting of clinical IR educational material. So I would like to now introduce our presenters for tonight. Ethan from the Bioinnovation Committee and our speaker, Dr. Murphy.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Ethan Nchusi. I'm the Medical Student Council Biodesign and Innovation Committee Chair, and I'm proud to announce our committee's webinar series, which will be featuring innovators in the field of interventional radiology. So without further ado, we'll get started here. I'm very excited and honored to introduce our guest tonight, Dr. Kieran Murphy, graduated from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland in 1986. He initially pursued a primary fellowship in surgery and BSc in anatomy before becoming interested in medical innovation and moving to radiology residency at Albany Medical Center. He went on to complete his residency and neuroradiology fellowship at the University of Michigan, followed by an interventional neuroradiology fellowship at the University of Geneva. Since then, he's led the Division of Interventional Neuroradiology from 1998 to 2008 at Johns Hopkins University. He was then recruited by University of Toronto and University Health Network in 2008 as professor and vice chair of radiology and deputy chief of the UHN Department of Medical Imaging. From 2012, he has been the director of clinical faculty at the Techna Research Institute, where he has been heavily involved in developing a culture of innovation, incubation, and entrepreneurial behavior in the Techna and UHN faculty. Over his career, he has filed 60 patents on new medical devices, pioneering new routes, techniques, and approaches to complex spine and neurovascular and CSF pathologies. He started 8 medical device companies, authored over 150 peer-reviewed publications, published several textbooks, and has mentored over 60 residents and fellows. His devices are used 60,000 times a year worldwide. He currently focuses on spine augmentation, radiofrequency ablation of bone metastatic disease, ozone and disc herniation, antioxidant use in radiation injury reduction, and global medical education through Medlantis. Dr. Murphy was awarded the Society of Interventional Radiology Innovator of the Year Award in 2015 and was nominated for the 2016 Manning Innovation Award. His hobbies include medical device development, historic airplanes, race car driving, and taking things apart. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce everyone to Dr. Kieran Murphy. Dr. Murphy, thank you so much for being here with us tonight and taking time to share your story with us.
Thanks very much. It's very kind of you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Listen, I'll try and make this interesting. You know, inventors tend not to belong to committees, you know. We're slightly anarchic individuals usually. And we tend not to really like organizations that much. So we tend to be relatively eccentric, idiosyncratic characters who work in academic institutions and always say yes when people ask us to do difficult things. You know, and we kind of live on the edge in terms of what we do and the risks we're willing to take for the benefit of patients. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out where good ideas come from. And if you want to read about this, there's some good books. This is a good one. Stephen Johnson, who writes for Wired and Fast Company and a few other magazines, has written some good books. And this is a good one called Where Good Ideas Come From. And he talks about the types of people who invent things. When I was running the SIR meeting in 2010, I took the entire membership of the society, which was 6,000 people, and I cross-referenced it with patent filings at the USPTO and the European Patent Office. And we found 2,458 patents in 5,000 members. And that boiled down to about 448 people with those patents. And some were critical in this, and we contacted them and built social network maps of them. And so we could see where they worked, which institutions were key in this, and actually we could see who they were. And we could see them by name. And then we could see who they influenced, and in a time-elapse way we could see who they trained and where those people went and the cultures that were built around them. And so it boils down to individuals in key institutions who do this. And if you look at this chart of growth of patent filings, which is one metric of invention, it's not the only one, you can see that around 2001, or maybe 1998, 1997, there was a huge increase in patent filings. And this probably represents a shift in focus in hospitals towards IR and the growth of IR as a specialty and on INR. And the stuff that we developed, these people developed, is now used by vascular surgery, cardiology, and radiology, and interventional neuroradiology, and physiatry, and physical medicine and rehab, and pain anesthesiology, and everyone. But it boils down to these kind of key people like Bob Vogelsang or Mike Dake or other folks who worked at places like Penn or Hopkins or Stanford or UCSF, and who they trained. You can see, like in Montreal, Gilles Soulez trained some people, and they went and started centers on their own. And so most inventors build social networks around them of other inventors. Each idea has a genealogy, just like family history. And you can trace ideas and the way they're shared through meetings and people. So Hervé Darmon invented, for example, vertebroplasty in 1984. And he trained 4 people, Daniel Rufinock, Darshan Ganji, Anne Cotten, and Jacques Chirac. And they each went to meetings, or they trained people, and here I am over here. And then I returned to America and to Hopkins and ran a meeting at Sundance in Utah, and then one in Canada, and then at SIR, and then in China. And Afshan Ganji learned from Hervé and went to ASNR and CIRCE. And Cotten went to RSNA and educated Jacques Dion at UVA, who then trained other people who went to University of Michigan. So you can track an idea through face-to-face communication, and it gives you a sense of the necessity to have meetings, face-to-face meetings, to share ideas, and how it passes from person to person, like family stories and family lore, and a verbal history of things. It's kind of interesting how no matter how high-tech we are, it still boils down to face-to-face meetings. So when you look at Inventions. I hate the word innovation. Every uninventive, boring administrator talks about innovation. Like, no one's going to be against innovation, but most of it is process, or most of it is grantsmanship, and very little of it is really inventive. And inventions come from social engagement in the cause of looking after our patients. 92% of the devices that are invented come from physicians, not PhDs. The ideas and inventions come from agreeing to treat challenging patients. And inventorship is not about money. It's about public service and responsibility to treat difficult people, difficult patients. Inventorship is about kind of chemistry between people, not financial math and, compound interest and stock options. It comes from working in hospitals of last resort and agreeing to accept challenging patients. And then we share our solutions via symposia, our meetings. How do you create cultures of inventorship? Well, recruitment is critical. It's interesting in this relatively xenophobic moment in American history to look at this from the immigrant perspective. Immigrants make up 13% of the US population. They make up 33% of the patent holders and 25% of the Nobel Prize winners in the US. So there's a certain kind of genotype and phenotype that you get when you hire an inventive, creative person. And you can tame them. You can make a wild man tame, but you can't make a tame man wild. Or woman. And I never mean to be sexist about that. So, and because, you accept difficult procedures, difficult, challenging patients, necessity is the mother of invention. And without necessity, you have no invention. It's interesting to look at wealthy countries like Sweden and Denmark and Belgium and Norway and Finland, rich in natural resources, and they have incredibly low invention rates. And those with poorer natural resources have higher invention rates. Inventors tend to be relatively heretical. They don't give a damn. They believe strongly, fervently that what they're doing is right, and they go ahead and do it. And they look for forgiveness, not for permission. They perhaps have particular minds, and the way they're structured may be unique. If you look at this example of a patent from Nikola Tesla in 1896, okay, this is the RF coil that he invented, and that's the basis of our MRI machine today. So 90 years ago, this really crazy genius, who was way on the fringe of normal, close to, well, probably actually abnormal, invented this RF coil that we rely on today. So inventors, if they existed, would be like rare earth elements. They're not common elements in the periodic table like carbon or, sodium. They're more rarefied like rare earth elements, and they interact with other people under pressure and rarely and only when necessary. In fact, you can assign to people elements of the periodic table as manifestations of their character. It's funny to do that. There's a brilliant book by Primo Levi where he did this with his friends and colleagues when they were in a concentration camp. He's a Jewish chemist from Italy who was interned and in a concentration camp in Germany in the Second World War. And he gave some people, say, carbon as their element because they form social networks. He gave some people sulfur or phosphorus because they were kind of poisonous people. And he gave some, for example, iodine because they injected energy into whatever group of people they were in. It's an interesting way to think about things and to think, what element are you? Now, because you're all interested in IR, you're all going to be more risk tolerant. You're going to have a personality type that's perhaps used to extreme sports or extreme activities, and you're going to be more engaged in patient care. And as a personality type, you will be different than those who want to go into radiology to make money, do cross-sectional or musculoskeletal imaging, and have lifestyle. As a group, we're mostly harmless, like this book by Douglas Adams. And we're fortunate in that we have great knowledge of technology, of computers, of medicine, and perhaps engineering. Because honestly, this is about geeky power. We're independent and obstinate and able to believe that we're correct when others around us are wrong. And our knowledge of physics is key to our success as a group and to our inventiveness. Now, we also have empathy and compassion. And we're concerned for patients and their welfare and their suffering and their pain. This is my lovely dog Tessa, wearing her collar when she had surgery on her paw, and to demonstrate to her that I cared about her, that I'd empathy. I too wore a collar for a while, just to like really confuse her, basically. We're good with our hands. We can improvise, and we can use our hands and use tools well, which is something that puts us more akin or more aligned with the guys in the basement in hospitals who do maintenance than our administrators or maybe our more cross-sectional colleagues. When we're in angio suites, we tend to be, our CT procedures, we tend to be more focused, more alert, and more alive. And, you know, when we're doing procedures, we're remarkably engaged, fully alert, which is a wonderful state to be in. This is one of my favorite patients. He just died. He played 840 games for the Chicago Blackhawks, and he developed lung cancer that was missed. And he had metastatic disease. I began by doing some lumbar and S1 cement augmentation, and then I went on and did the sacral ala, and the iliac crests, and you know, augmented as much bone as possible. And so we're willing to push the envelope for our patients to make sure they're looked after, and we're resilient and strong in our mind about what we're doing. And this is where, in true inventiveness comes from. So this demonstrates in this particular patient just a ridiculous number of needles and a ridiculous amount of cement being injected, but it gave him pain relief and it enabled him to keep walking until just about a week before his death. This is what he looked like in the end. And most rational people, my wife, the internist pediatrician, wouldn't do this, and because it isn't in her emotional range to do these kind of crazy things. So one of the things that I found as an inventor is that a lot of the things I invent come from stupid stuff that I did. Now this is me and my son racing very fast go-karts, like 100-mile-an-hour go-karts, for a charity event, and it began to snow. Unfortunately, I broke a rib when I went off the track at about 80 miles an hour into a barrier. And I wound up realizing how painful rib fractures are. And I looked at what could be done about it. I discovered that rib fractures are very poorly treated. In fact, plate and screws are about all that can be done for them. And an elderly person with osteoporosis with rib fractures has about a 40% mortality. 40% for 4 rib fractures, 50% for 5 rib fractures. So I worked on methods of treating rib fractures that are minimally invasive approach using dental cement and PRP. So my approach to rib fractures has changed fundamentally. We've developed a novel syringe for this, and we hope we can get people like you in the future to treat rib fractures under an intercostal nerve block, and do that at the level above and below the rib that's fractured, and then inject bone cement into the rib fracture itself, a biodegradable bone cement, a calcium phosphate cement. And these kind of procedures come from personal recognition that something needs to be done better. Now, another area where we need to do better is in back pain and contained disc herniations. This is my ozone device. I've been at this for about 13 years because inventorship takes time. From the moment you have the idea to the moment you get FDA approval, and then the training starts. So this is a syringe in which you aspirate up oxygen, you turn on the device, like lightning it generates ozone in the barrel of the syringe, and then you inject it into a herniated disc via a 22 gauge needle. Hopefully this will play. Here we go. Okay, so that was ozone dissolving a regular sterile surgical glove. Isn't that pretty remarkable? You wouldn't think that, but ozone is remarkably astringent and shrinks disc herniations. This is a 45-year-old female with a left S1 radiculopathy. The images here are of the procedure. You see the needle going into the disc space under a regular discogram type approach under fluoro. Here you see some CT images of a similar procedure. You see the needle going in to the disc space, and you see ozone gas injected here and then along the tract around the dorsal root ganglion. Here you see an image of the disc herniation initially and then 6 weeks post-procedure. Here's an axial image demonstrating a central and left paracentral disc herniation compressing the left S1 nerve root, and here you see after 6 weeks with shrinkage of the disc. So we just finished the 39-person prospective study in Canada in 3 hospitals at UBC, University of Western Ontario, London, and University of Toronto. And thankfully, after 13, 14 years' work, it actually works, which is good. So that's an example of a device and gives you a sense of how long it takes to develop a device. Now, there are many things we do badly, and if you want to invent something, it's important to find something we do badly. There's no point in doing something we do well, like cataract surgery. You really can't make any improvement in the area of cataract surgery because it's done so well. So take something like female back pain. Women have back pain for different reasons than men. In fact, women get pelvic issues that result in extraspinal sciatica. And about 20% of women's back pain does not come from the disc, facet, or neural foramen. And so when you read an MRI of the spine in a woman, you've got to look in different places than you would in a man. And look for evidence of piriformis syndrome or the cyclical sciatica of endometriosis on L4-5, L5-S1, ischial tuberosity calcifications, large uterine fibroids, or Tarlov cysts. Now these are Tarlov cysts, and I've treated about 400 people with these now. These were initially described in 1931 by Tarlov. These are cysts that erode the sacrum. They're large cysts that have mass effect on adjacent nerve roots and really undermine the structural integrity of the sacrum. And I treat these by putting in 2 needles, 1 deep, 1 superficial, by aspirating fluid and creating an air fluid level under CT fluoro, and then by injecting fibrin into the cyst, which fills it about 80%. So this is a good example of a novel technique that I developed because I agreed to treat an underserved patient population, and it's had a phenomenal impact. That paper resulted in more people adopting the technique. Sorry, the paper I published in AJNR of 213 patients with 5-year follow-up has resulted in other centers now beginning to treat these women, because previously they've been considered like cranks and as if they were mad. But in fact, they had something that was not being recognized as a pathology. So agreeing to treat difficult people, agreeing to do novel things is a critical piece of being inventive. Now we should talk about what forms our belief in terms of what we treat. And one of the things we have to be aware of is we're sold to, we're marketed to by industry all the time. The device industry is about 434 billion a year for medical devices that are disposable. Pharma is about 800 billion a year. Our practice is determined by FDA approval and CE mark. And we do what's approved and we do what's reimbursed. So, that's kind of a problem. It means that if approval is obtained by industry, they're shaping our practice. And their set of values are different than ours. And they can construct our values for us by industry-funded research. And Senator Grassley, one of the better senators, I think, had a series of hearings about that and found that 75% of industry-funded trials are ghost-written. Now, we're faith-based kind of people, and we work in an environment that's remarkably like a religious environment. We wear costumes, we have rituals, we're very focused, and we adopt things that align with our pre-existing beliefs more rapidly than things that do not align with our beliefs. There's a field called technoanthropology, filled with consultants who will build a belief system that ensures rapid adoption of a new technology around a device. They know how to build KOL networks, or key opinion leader networks. They know how to dominate societies by sponsoring the society. And the higher the device price point, the greater the reward for dominating that segment. If you look at orthopedics, in 2008, $500 million was paid to orthopedic spine surgeons. This is Ronald Reagan advertising cigarettes. And that's a classic example of key opinion leader opinion formation. So, there's lots of papers on this. One of my pet hates, for example, is the live case demonstration. This is a paper I published in Lancet about the evils of live case demonstrations at meetings. The patient complication rate when they're having a procedure that is a live demonstration at a major event goes up 3- or 4-fold. There have been deaths at cardiology meetings during live demonstrations that are broadcast into the meeting. So companies, they're not unethical, they just work to a different ethical framework. Our duty is to the patient and students in science. Companies are focused on the financial interests of the shareholder and profit. There are many examples of this. J&J has been caught doing this. GlaxoSmithKline paid a $3 billion fine. Abbott, $1.6 billion. Another fine here to J&J of $2 billion. Medtronic has paid many hundred millions in the area of bone morphogenic protein, or BMP2, and Kaifon. Okay, I'm going to skip these slides, but basically it talks about how Kaifon manipulated their data. Now, one area that's really important that informs your inventorship, your creativity, is what you read. Hobbies help sustain us during prolonged periods of stress. As you study for your boards, as you study for whatever exam you're doing, it's important that you read, and you continue to read, you continue to have good hobbies. This is a brilliant book, if you ever find it. You can get a copy online, by Winston Churchill, written in about 1935, where he talks in the first page that a gentleman or gentlewoman needs a hobby to sustain themselves during prolonged periods of stress. And then, so he painted right through the Second World War. His paintings are now very valuable and very good. But this book is quite a great indicator of the fact that hobbies are important. It used to be that people had widely diversified hobbies. This is Oscar Wilde's house in Dublin. I was just there last week. He was a great poet, great author, great wit. But his dad was an ENT surgeon. And he was an oral and ophthalmic surgeon, archaeologist, ethnologist, antiquarian, biographer, statistician, topographer, historian, folklorist, and much more diversified interests. There's a great book by a surgeon called Truance about people who left medicine and did other things. And so there's a tradition in medicine that we engage in all paths of life: politics, healthcare, inventorship, authorship, poetry, everything. And that's really an important part of maintaining our creativity, particularly in your first few years out of residency. You don't want to become a golfer. Golfers have contributed nothing, I think, to creativity in the world. Maybe money, but money doesn't count. None of this is about money. It's about purpose and engagement. Now, another thing to be aware of is that if you want to be creative, you want to be inventive, it's important to have periods of isolation. Sorry, I'm just going to shut the door here. Throughout history, great minds have had prolonged periods of solitude to allow percolation and perseveration and development of ideas. Newton was alone for 3 years on his farm during the Black Death when he developed the thoughts that went into the 3 laws in the Principia Mathematica. Darwin was on the Beagle for 6 years thinking about evolution. Descartes was involved in the 30-Year War when he came up with Cartesian principles. Galileo was under house arrest. Chadwick invented the cyclotron. So, 1914, this guy, James Chadwick, as brilliant as Tesla, asked his boss, Geiger, of the Geiger counter, should he go to Europe on vacation, 1914. So he goes, he says, yeah, sure, off you go. And he leaves Geiger's lab and goes to Germany on vacation and gets interned for 4 years and put in a horse box because they used the stables as a prison in a German prisoner of war camp. And in those 4 years, he intellectually, with pure intellectual horsepower, came up with the concept of the neutron and the cyclotron to detect it. And that is what gives us PET today. Now, the degree of insight that we get based on solitude is often related to the length of isolation we get. And I find that the longer the flight that I'm on, the better the thoughts I can have. So I would beseech you all to try and preserve your minds, particularly first thing in the morning or last thing at night, from clutter, to maintain the signal-to-noise ratio in your head. You can't invent, you can't create if you're surrounded by noise. You need isolation. Now, I was worried that the focus on money in the startup culture had resulted in physicians becoming less engaged in societal causes, that we became too focused on financial success, not social engagement. So with a bunch of students, I looked over the last, 100 and so years at physicians' engagement in different walks of life. And I found, in fact, that physician engagement as writers and poets and artists is pretty stable. Physicians as politicians actually increased, particularly in the years after the Second World War. Physician involvement in science and other fields of science is stable. Physicians as criminals, this was interesting. 80% of the physicians who are murderers are surgeons. It's quite strange. Physicians as athletes has increased, and in summary, physician engagement has remained stable or slightly increased. And what's curious is when you look at milestones around medical innovation, and then you map those with physician engagement, they overlap. And then you look at the years in which this engagement or creativity or medical invention occurred, and you find it's the windows after war. So 1918, 1919, 1920, uptick in physician engagement in society, authorship, inventorship. 1946, 47, 48, after the Vietnam War, after the Korean War, after Afghanistan and Iraq, or after the worst phase of that, or when it was worse than it is now, though it's still bad. You see that physicians become more engaged in social causes. And this is just to emphasize to you that inventorship is not about money, it's about social engagement and doing something you think is done badly that you want to do better. What's going on with my computer? Okay, now, so inventorship, creativity and engagement is heightened immediately after war or major national trauma. And war brings technology development that results in medical advance. Now, your area of creativity may not be in the manufacturing of a new device. It might be in the discovery of a problem or a solution to a problem. And whatever it is, you should pursue it. Sometimes there are things we think are done badly and we just want to see them done better. An area that I was bothered about for like 20 years that was on my mind since internship was elder abuse. You're all familiar with CAFE syndrome or pediatric child non-accidental injury. Well, there's a similar pattern in the elderly. And this is a paper I've published 3 now on the area of elder abuse. These are images showing non-accidental fractures in the elderly, in the proximal humerus, in the ulna, rib and scapular fractures with pneumonia, multiple old rib fractures, etc. So now at Rochester and at Weill Cornell and in Toronto, there are posters in the emergency room reminding the radiologist to look for maxillofacial trauma, repeated subdurals, rib fractures, forearm fractures, and to alert the ER physicians to this. And this is an example of being bothered by something for a long time, not letting it go, doing the research, finding the answer, being engaged socially with a social cause, not being a golfer, and contributing in some way. So that's a good example. Now, there's some fun, crazy things that physicians who are inventors do too. There is a tradition of self-experimentation. I've often done experiments on myself. The first gadolinium-enhanced MR angiography that was done was, well, it was injected on me by Jim Meany and Martin Prince. And we did this repeatedly to each other until we perfected carotid gadolinium-enhanced MRA. Some of the early guys were completely nuts. This is Charlie Daughter, and you can see from his eyes, he was mad. This is Werner Bronfman. He invented the PICC line and did the first right heart catheterization. This is his paper. Werner Frostman, rather. So he did this to himself. He numbed up his antecubital fossa, introduced a red rubber tube, and introduced it to the right side of his heart, and then took an X-ray of that. Now, he was fired the next day, but in the early 1950s, he got the Nobel Prize. This is really crazy. This is a Canadian, Joachim Berheny, who did angioplasty of his own prostate for prostatic hypertrophy as a potential cause of, a potential treatment of prostatic outlet obstruction. I did these experiments myself initially, but this is an example of a huge area that's done badly. You know, there's no point in doing things that are done well. There are big gaps. If everybody is looking at dose reduction to control X-ray induced injury, well, it's pretty much done. But you know, one day I came home from work bothered about this, and my son and I went for a walk with our dog Cora. And we bumped into this man who I didn't know at the time, and we were chatting. He had a dog. Our dog was playing with his dog. And so Mr. D'Souza and I were talking, and he said, "What do you do?" And I told him, "Well, I'm bothered about radiation injury. I'm wondering about what we can do. And maybe, you know, the crazy idea I had was that antioxidants could work." And he said, "Well, I make antioxidants." So by just happenstance, I met this gentleman who had a company that made the solution to the problem that I had, almost in a Zen way. So we did some experiments on ourselves. This is me. When I do angiography, my breaks, these are DNA breaks. These are DNA breaks here and here and here. And then after radiation exposure, with pre-medication, my DNA breaks went down. So I was able to take Mr. D'Souza's formulation and protect myself, protect my DNA from the damage the radiation was doing. So we went on a bit. We perfected the formulation. These are the 5 elements: beta-carotene, N-acetylcysteine, vitamin C, quercetin, alpha-lipoic acid. And we did a prospective randomized study in humans. So men undergoing bone scans for prostate cancer getting technetium MDP. On the left are their baseline number of breaks. On the right are the number of breaks they had after bone scan agent was injected. Okay? Now the next group were pre-medicated with our antioxidants. On the left are their baseline breaks. On the right are the number of breaks they had after pre-medication had had its beneficial effect. So now we started a company to make this formulation. It's going to be named after my dog Cora, and it's called CoraMed, and it looks very positive. And to give you an idea of how these things happen, the group that are going to make it are actually on Kieran Street in Quebec, outside Montreal near the airport. So sometimes there's almost like a Zen-like thing that happens when you're having ideas, when you're in a positive state, when you're thinking in a good way, things fall into place. I want to reiterate the importance of isolation. This is Bjork's house in Iceland. Isolation is really critical to good deep thought. Reading widely is really, really important to learn from other fields and have good ideas. But, you know, isolation and doggedness is really important when you want to persist with an idea. I firmly believe that inventorship is a form of socially engagement, a form of social engagement as a physician, social engagement in our research. Good ideas come from being invested in causes, and that, you know, we have to take the future of medicine back from PhDs and administrators who look at us like we're just kind of unreliable cost centers. Patients teach us what we need to do, they teach us how to be better people, and they give us the problems that let us be creative and let us develop and invent novel solutions to their problems. It's really important always to be the person who says yes in your department. Will you biopsy this thing? Yes. And then you go, Jesus, how am I going to biopsy that? But by agreeing to biopsy something, you help the patient. You may develop a new imaging technique. You may develop a better needle. You may develop a better route, and you make a difference. You know, I mentioned earlier that most of us who invent have extreme hobbies. My hobby is this is my race car. This is me and my race car. I race competitively in the Ontario and Quebec Formula Ford Championship. There's usually about 40 of us on the track at one time, and there's usually some carnage. This is my GoPro camera up here. I've gone through about 6 of them. They come off very easily. And, you know, so if I can help any of you with your ideas, never hesitate to contact me. If you're at SIR, I'll happily sit down and have a cup of coffee with you and talk about how to get your ideas turned into something real. But it's never about money. It's about the cause. It's about engagement. It's about making a difference. Thank you. Anyone there?
Yes, thank you so much for that, Dr. Murphy. That was a really inspirational talk.
Yes, that was very interesting.
Good, good, good.
So at this point in time, if anyone has any questions, they can go ahead and type in the chat boxes, and then we will relay those questions to Dr. Murphy so that he can answer them for you. And while you guys are starting to type your questions, I do have a couple of questions myself for you, Dr. Murphy.
Sure.
Do you think there is any way that you can teach someone to become an inventor, or do you think it's really more about that person's, the individual personalities that drive them towards making social change?
So I think people have, everyone has well, some people just don't, right? Some people are just, it's not the way they're built. And you don't want everyone to be built like this, or things mightn't get done efficiently. But there are people with this latent tendency towards inventorship or creativity, and they don't get to activate it because it's kind of like a muscle. It's kind of like a form of fitness. And there comes with time a confidence that you can pull it off, that you can actually do this thing. So it requires mentorship to become confident that you can accept the challenge, to realize when people say, oh, you know, they should do this. We are they, right? We live in the most wealthy continent in the world, and we work in beautifully equipped hospitals. So if we don't accept the responsibility of being that person who comes up with that solution, who will do it? So I think it can be cultured, it can be made normal, it can be made acceptable. You have to be in the right environment. If you're in a academic center with, or you know, if you're near somebody who's done it before, they can guide you through the process. What you don't want to be is in a private practice culture where the first reaction of your private practice colleagues is, well, I want 50% of that, because you wouldn't have invented that if you didn't work here, you know, and that just kills innovation. So you need to be in a place where your IP is yours and where you can be supported and get mentored so that you can really achieve, you know, what you're capable of.
So thank you very much, Dr. Murphy. It was a very good presentation. So I actually had another question. If we are interested in, you know, developing ideas, are there major resources you would suggest that should be available in the area we practice? Like if we go to an academic institution as a career, what are things we should look for to be able to, you know, develop ideas and making them popular?
So, you know, the folks who are going to be more creative, frankly, will be in the IR or interventional neuro departments, not the diagnostic departments. There's a Myers-Briggs personality type huge difference between the person who does, say, MRI physics and MR versus the person who does intervention. There's a disinhibition about the interventionalist and a willingness to say yes, rather than the physicist who's going to go, the problem is, you know, or tell you why something doesn't work. So you've got to identify somebody who will help you, and they can guide you through the system, because most places will have a technology institute, a center for medical device innovation, a biomedical engineering, medical school relationship. Every medical school, every decent university has this kind of center. Somebody will have donated money to name it, and in that place there will be resources to help you. The big thing that's missing from most of those centers are clinicians with clinical problems. So if you go to one of those places, they will be thrilled. A lot of them are overly PhD driven, and those PhDs are often, though well-intentioned, they're producing answers to questions nobody is asking. And they're missing the big needs. I don't know how many places are developing devices for robotic guided biopsy. There is no market for that. You know, in a world of global economic challenge, if our North American system does not support robotic guided biopsy, where else in the world will? Another example of a complete waste of time of a field is interventional MRI. There have been more grants granted for interventional MRI, and probably maybe, what, 5 to 20 patients a year treated in interventional MRI by comparison to the number done under CT. Because CT fluoro works, and CT fluoro crosses economic borders. It can be used in Africa, it can be used in Latin America, it can be used throughout Europe, it can be used in Estonia, Romania, Czechoslovakia. Interventional MRI will never diffuse like that. Therefore, no one is ever going to make an interventional MRI needle or interventional MRI devices. MRIs are best used for doing MRIs of the brain and spine and knees and hips. And so, you know, so there are some areas that get over-published on, over-written about, over-evaluated, they just will never fly commercially.
Great, thank you. So we actually have a long list of questions. We can just go down the list here. So the first one is Alexander Sider asked a question, what do you think are currently the hottest fields for innovation in IR?
You know, that's a good question. I can tell you when you look at things that are crowded, the window's closed. Stents, drug-eluting balloons, drug-eluting beads, Y90, really crowded, okay? But look somewhere else. Look at, say, back pain in the elderly. Aging population, many of them overweight, suffering from back pain, and one of the most common things that makes an elderly person wind up going into a nursing home is simple back pain. Huge need for innovation there, inventorship there. Managing infected tissue to increase our yield. Do you know what the yield in a blood culture is? You'd think it'd be really high, right? Mm-hmm. It's about 20%. Do you know what the yield on disc biopsy and infection is? 32%. And of that 32%, 92% of the organisms that are grown are gram-positive, because all the gram-negative ones die during the transport. So there are big, simple things that we need to do, because we all die of ischemia or infection. You know, we need to look at the big, simple things that we can do that are being missed. The cool, sexy areas like interventional MR, totally overfocused on. Large areas are underserved. It's kind of like, you know, everybody talks about Cisco, CISCO, the computer company, but nobody talks about Cisco, CYSCO, the food company that delivers food to your hospitals, your schools, your universities. They are bigger, and we need them more. So you have to look at the underserved areas, not the crowded areas. Look where there are big gaps, where nobody is looking. Look at things we do badly.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
The next question we have is, how developed should your ideas be before you approach potential angel investors?
Oh, God. Yeah, you don't want to do that. No, you have to have a filed provisional patent before you talk to an angel investor. I mean, you have to get, you know, there are many steps before you can go talk to an angel investor. That's a very late thing to do, and you know, often people make mistakes in that area, and everyone gets frustrated, and the angel loses their money, and they don't come back to you. It's best if you can work with the institutional biomedical engineering kind of research institute aimed at developing novel and innovative solutions, medical device development within your institution. Maybe they'll have seed funding, you know, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. You don't need to go get angel investor money until you're doing something much more complicated. So you want to have a filed patent, you want to have working prototypes, you want to know what your regulatory pathway is. If you're going to get angel money, you know, you probably need a guy to run the company. Because you're a doctor, you're not able to run companies, you don't know anything about it. You don't know how to write a business plan. So I work with the same group of people all the time. For the last, 17 years, I've just accumulated a group of people I work with repeatedly, and who I can rely on. So mentorship in this area is far more important than even thinking about angel investors.
So the next question is, how do you manage your time between clinical duty, academic work, and your isolated time to ponder upon inventions, also with family?
That's a great. So I work 7 days a week. I don't consider inventing stuff or working on this stuff as work. I have 2 kids, 20 and 17, and a big hairy dog who needs a walk. I was very fortunate. I treat a lot of elderly people with back pain, and if you're Canadian or have been to Canada, you would know about a company called Tim Hortons. They make coffee, and the founder, Ron Joyce, supports my research. So I have academic time on Friday and Monday, and I work clinically 3 days a week. And if I can only get anesthesia on a Friday or Monday, I'll treat people then. But I try to protect 2 days a week of my time so that I can think. And, that's the critical thing. I do some things, like I don't open my BlackBerry first thing in the morning, okay? I don't read email first thing in the morning for about the first half hour, and I read something non-medical before I go to sleep. I spend a lot of time with our kids. Basically, I'm sort of Uber driver most of the weekend, but I think it's, you should find some protective time so you can be creative. And one of the things about looking after back pain in the elderly is many of the folks you look after, particularly the golfers, have bad backs, and they'll donate to your research to allow you look after more elderly people with back pain. And this is where you can buy the time, as it were, from your group, from your department, to think.
Great. So the next question from Daniel Crawford: what has been the most effective way of pushing ideas and inventions to the market? Patent and license, engage early with medical device company, founding a company.
I think that I've tried all variations, and it's changed over time. There are some companies that have very good, safe cultures, like W.E. Cook, and you can trust them. You can make handshake agreements with them. There are others that I would never trust, like J&J. And there are some who are just so abominably slow, like Medtronic, that they're so frustrating that, it just is so difficult. So I've done everything from straight license with R&D and development to start from scratch and go through the angel phase and then the VC phase. One of my companies that I'm a founder shareholder of, called Synaptive, is now valued at a vast amount of money, like crazy. It's called a unicorn, and that has gone beautifully over the last 5 years because of great management. So, it's important to hire professional managers as things move along. Our skill is to be doctors. It's not to be businessmen. There's a shamelessness that is required, for example, by sales folks, that we will never have. And so just as you have specialists in medicine, you need specialists in business to handle your idea. And you employ those people. And if they're bad, you fire them early. But it's really about surrounding yourself with people who can teach you or mentor you, and then building teams for each individual project. Okay.
All right. So next one, as a poor resident with some ideas, how can I fund patents, product development, etc.? I asked some medical device inventors, and they admitted a high entry cost. Is it okay to work with industry in the beginning to get your first idea off the ground?
So industry isn't interested in working with you anymore. They used to have people internally who could finagle things and MacGyver things, but say Medtronic have fired all those people to make themselves more profitable, so their stock price goes up. So they have, what the phrase would be, they have no internal capacity for organic development. So those days are gone. I think it's important to work with the assets you have locally. So what does your hospital have a tech transfer office? Is there a biomedical school of engineering nearby? Is there a university that you can work with? who wants to work on these things with you. A provisional patent is about, I think it's like $200. It's just an essay. It's just a scientific paper. You know, so I think at that young age, at that early stage, mentorship, finding somebody you can talk to is the critical thing.
The next question, could you be more specific about the steps from idea to invention? Do you protect IP? Who do you discuss ideas with? Who do you develop ideas with? Seek larger companies to support the ideas?
Never seek larger companies. You can't trust any of them. I have notebooks. I'm on my 20th idea notebook. I record all my ideas. I carry these notebooks in my backpack all the time. You know, I don't discuss my ideas with very many people. There's only a handful of people that I would ever share a new idea with until I had it perfected. Most people really can't add that much unless they see the same problem you see. So you develop it in your head. Most of this is purely intellectual. And then you might 3D print something. That's cheap. You might write equivalent of a scientific paper and file a provisional patent. Doing that allows you to document what you know. At that stage, you then go to the local School of Biomedical Engineering, look at their website, or see who in your hospital is somebody you could work with and work hand in hand with. You know, but you don't go to VCs, you don't go to industry. They run to a different set of values than we do.
Next question, any advice for an aspiring inventor during residency training?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the beautiful things about being an inventor as a resident is you're not covered by any hospital IP policy, so you own 100% of what you invent. That's usually the case, okay? You're not, the university doesn't own what you know, and the hospital you're working in doesn't own what you know. So document, perseverate, Google the hell out of it, you know, use Google patent search, try and get as much free information as you can. And you know, I honestly believe the SIR needs to do a better job with mentorship in this field, and we should all collectively lobby the SIR to do something about this. What they're doing at the moment is not working, and they're not assisting their members either. So I honestly believe the SIR has a very, very large role to play in this. There are a lot of guys like me, there's at least 20 or 30 in the SIR who've been successful, and we would mentor people. And then we know where to get the contacts and the money from. The SIR should do this. A lot of people in small hospitals don't have people who can mentor. It's the natural role of the SIR to do this.
And then the next question, do you have any thoughts on startup incubators?
You know, I'm careful. We have these things called J-Labs up here. I don't trust them as far as I'd throw them. I don't want to sound paranoid, but J&J really want to learn what people know. They want to know what, they want to get it early. They want to acquire it cheaply and pay as little as possible for it before you realize how valuable it is. So, yes, I think they have value, but just document what you know and realize that, you know, not everybody may be on your side. I think that you can accelerate quickly through startup incubators if your institution has one. Just watch for the ones that are sponsored by people like J&J.
Okay, the next question. What are some considerations or precautions one should keep in mind to avoid getting into trouble? I would like to take on difficult or almost impossible cases, which frequently requires taking on extra risks and probably beyond the standard of care. If there's good outcome, then everyone's happy, but what if there are negative outcomes? And the question, the person is concerned about the litigious environment. What are the limits?
You know, it depends on the context in which you work. Now, none of you are going to be personally responsible for patient care decisions, really, because you're going to be under the supervision of a staff, right? And in the first few months of your careers, when you're independent, of course, you're going to make prudent decisions. But ultimately, you can go through your life being fearful. You have to talk to the families, you have to talk to the patients, make sure they trust you, make sure people around you know how extreme the situation is, and then you do the right thing.
Okay. The next question, is there a way to tell, are there any telltale signs or characteristics of people you can trust? Like when you meet a person, how do you tell, how do you tell from a simple conversation if that person is someone you can share a productive, creative relationship?
You know, that's a difficult question. 95% of the time I can tell. Twice I've been wrong in 20 years of doing this. And we as doctors tend to trust people because most of our patients tell us the truth. It's a very good question. I think you have to trust your intuition. You also have to do some background checks on people and see what other people's experience has been. Usually if you smell a rat in the beginning, it only gets worse.
Okay. The next question, how do you tell when you are going down the wrong path, when your creativity is futile, like MRI procedures you mentioned?
Yeah, it's like any, you know, you have a relationship with an idea like you have a relationship with your partner. And my wife will probably kill me, but like, you know, it's just, you have to know when to stop working on something. You have to know when to put it away, that it's just not going to work. There are some ideas I really believe in, like hydrocephalus and treating hydrocephalus better. No one is interested in doing that. They're happy with the status quo. They're happy with 100% shunt failure. They're happy with those having shunt after shunt after shunt. It really bothers me that that happens. My cousin Oliver had untreated hydrocephalus when I was a kid. I've always wanted to fix hydrocephalus. There is zero interest in making a better hydrocephalus device. I can't do anything about that. I have to focus on what I can change. Back pain in the elderly is the nearest alternative, meaningful thing I can work on. And so sometimes you just have to be pragmatic about this. It's like, you know, you've got a car you love, but it keeps breaking down and it's time to sell it.
All right, and then the next question, can you recommend a good book on the process of filing patents?
There are a bunch of good books. I'm looking around my office here, which is a mess, but basically the Stanford Biodesign book called Biodesign is one of the best books. And it's published by, I think it's Paul Yock. Now he was lucky enough to invent the monorail coronary stent. I think he's close to a billionaire now. So Paul Yock, Y-O-C-K, Biodesign is the book.
Next one. What is your advice on finding or identifying an effective mentor in IR inventorship to learn from?
You know, again, you know, one thing that's come from this is I think SIR has to help us here. Because there'll be people out there, like of the 33 of you, you're in departments where there isn't a mentor. There isn't somebody who can guide you. The SIR should step up and fill that gap.
Let's see. I guess we kind of touched on this. When you have an idea for an invention, what is the next step? Who makes up your team when working on the invention?
You write that paper, you make that 3D model, you file that provisional patent, and then you try and find a mentor to get you through the process.
The next one, is there any form of more formal training that goes into becoming an inventor?
You know, there isn't. I think most of us have just made mistake after mistake after mistake and learned on. But you know, there are a lot of folks within SIR. I can think of 20 to 30 of them who would be interested in being mentors. And it isn't an onerous task because there aren't that many inventors out there.
Okay. And then the next question, so you kind of touched on this as well. So the question is, you mentioned where you focused on things that are being done badly. Are there any areas you think IR needs to improve on?
Well, I think I mentioned a few. I think I mentioned infection and management of infected tissue, blood cultures, the pain we cause in procedures, the pain we cause when we place an IV or do a femoral access, you know, drainage procedures. Can we do it better? Last year, a year ago, I was very ill. After procedure, I got a hospital-acquired infection after a hip injection, developed bacterial endocarditis, splenic and hepatic and renal infarcts, strokes, septic emboli to my brain, my toes, my eyes. I had a PICC line and a port, and sorry, a PICC line and a drain. And I can assure you, it hurts when you got those things. So we need to find ways of making what we do less painful for patients. We need to find ways of making indwelling devices less likely to get infected. We think about how nature solves problems with sort of biomimicry. There are lots of things that we could do better.
Well, so I think that's all the questions that we had. And I just wanted to repeat, because someone asked this, but this talk is recorded and will be available on YouTube after we end the session. So I think that's all the questions we have.
Great. Listen, I think you guys should lobby SIR, Erica Holland, at erica.holland at sirweb.org, and Sue Holster, and lobby them to put together a mentorship program. I would happily help with that.
Great, great.
Okay, well, I'm going to go walk the dog. And
Okay.
if I could ever help any of you guys or women present, my email is kieran.murphy@uhn.ca. Okay?
Great, great. Yeah, thank you very much. Ethan, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you very much, Dr. Murphy, for taking some time to talk to all of us tonight.
Okay, cheers. Have a good evening. I think it's Columbus Day weekend, is it?
I believe so.
Okay, so have a nice long weekend, okay?
All right, take care. Good night, everyone.